Hello, and welcome back to Reading Tintin, A Personal View. This is Sean, one half of Sean and Kiara. And just a quick note to say that if you are enjoying this series of videos, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps us to grow this channel. And if you like comics, please check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Sean and Kiara, where you'll see some of the projects that we're working on. We have a new graphic novel coming out in October of this year called Rhiannon. And I regularly post videos and artwork on our Patreon site, so please consider supporting us by becoming a paying member. So this time we're going to take a look at Destination Moon, and Destination Moon is the 16th volume of the Tintin adventures, and it is the first of another two-part arc which continues with Explorers on the Moon. And this is the third of the major two-part story arcs that appear in the Adventures of Tintin, the first being The Secret of the Unicorn and Red Rackham's Treasure, which was followed by The Seven Crystal Balls and Temple of the Sun. And then we had The Land of Black Gold, which was our last episode in between. Interesting thing about Land of Black Gold is on the cover we have that red Jeep, a very distinctive cover design, an element of the cover. And on Destination Moon, again, we have the Jeep. This time it's blue, but interesting that the Jeep should be a recurring design element on these two covers. So Destination Moon and it's the volume that followed, Explorers on the Moon, were begun serialization in Tintin magazine in 1950. So now we're in the height of Hergé's middle period, which was considered his peak, the peak period for these books, both in quality of the stories and in the drawings. And really, with these books, the craft of the drawing, I think, has reached its high point. It's kind of caught up with the storytelling, which had really been strong right up through, starting around Secret of the Unicorn. And now the level of the artistry and the draftsmanship is really at its peak. And we can see this particularly in the backgrounds and the vehicles. Again, planes, trains, and automobiles. And here we have to add rocket ships as well. Part of the appeal of the Tintin comics, the detail and the accuracy that Hergé and his collaborators would put into the backgrounds and the vehicles. And here it's really at its peak. And it's due in no small part to the fact that it was during the time that he was working on these that he opened his Studios Hergé. And he had a team set in place which would help him with the workload, which was becoming unmanageable for one person to do. And Hergé was always good at drawing the figures, and that's really where the magic of these comics come in. Nobody could really draw Tintin and the other characters like he could, and imbue them with life and humor. But he wasn't so much into the backgrounds, and so at first, collaborators like Edgar P. Jacobs he would work with really helped to dress up the look of the comics when Hergé was redoing a lot of the older black and white versions. More emphasis was put into making the backgrounds more detailed. And now with Studios Hergé, he had his team of workers. He had people working on the color. Color was another thing that he really never mastered himself. And he had people who specialized in vehicles and technical stuff. And his main collaborator at the time was Bob Damore, who would go on to be his main, his chief assistant and collaborator up to the end. And Bob Damore really got down Hergé's style, I mean, to a T, to the point where he could probably draw a Tintin comic and, you know, nobody would be able to tell the difference, except perhaps in the story, Hergé still had that magic, bringing the characters to life a bit. So the cover here, you can really see where the technical drawing aspect really comes to the forefront with these big gantries and just the way the rocket is rendered so perfectly, and the perspective of the Jeep approaching. I mean, it's just, what a great cover. The title page, oftentimes Hergé would put like a little extra kind of drawing here in the title page. Instead, this time he includes a frame from one of the scenes in the story. It's, you know, it's not the greatest use. It would have been nice if there was something a little extra here, kind of like how he did in Prisoners of the Sun. This is one of the books that I read later. I was already an adult when I finally rounded out my collection of Tintin comics, and so this was one of the later ones that I got, and kind of, I don't know that it filled in any holes in the story for me. It's kind of a standalone adventure, although there's some callback to the previous adventure, Land of Black Gold, but that one was one that I acquired later as well. So something like this is what I'm talking about for the title page. Kind of like a spot illustration that he uses for the header. Might have been nice on the title page, but we get it here. So classic beginning. So we've seen this many times already. It's usually with Tintin walking through the gates and up the drive towards Marlinspike, or Moulin-Sart is the French name of the chateau. And down the steps comes Nestor. And this adventure is kind of interesting, where it doesn't often happen. A lot of times the other adventures, they kind of begin with a cold start. This one, we're coming in right at the end of the last adventure. So they're Captain Haddock and Tintin have just arrived home from their last adventure. They've been in the Middle East for the Land of Black Gold, and Nestor has come down to greet them. And if you remember at the end of that story, Captain Haddock had received a photograph from Professor Calculus, who had been at home during that adventure, and was working on an antidote for some pills that the Thompsons had taken and were given them a strange affliction which made their hair and their skin turn color and their hair to grow. And it was part of a key element of the plot of the last story. And Professor Calculus had been working on finding an antidote for it, and in the process had all but destroyed Marlinspike, and he had sent the captain a photograph of Marlinspike Hall showing it looked like it had been bombed. Now it looks like it's been totally repaired. But they get home, and they're greeted with the news that Professor Calculus is not there, that he's already gone off. And so they don't know where he's gone. Nestor doesn't know where he's gone off to. Again, the relationship between the Siamese cat that lives in Marlinspike and Snowy. Snowy is always getting the worst of it. And finally, Nestor brings them a telegram, And so here we see the telegram, and it tells Captain Haddock that Calculus, who has sent the telegram, is in Sildavia. So Sildavia is a place that was introduced back in King Ottokar's scepter. So it was one of Hergé's fictional countries, the world of Tintin, sort of a Balkan, Eastern European country. It borders with another fictional nation called Borduria, which had some analog to Nazi Germany. But now the World War II is over, so things are going to change a little bit here. And it's 1950, so we're going to get much more of a Cold War sort of feel and a relationship between the Bordurians and the Sildavians. Hergé kind of follows the times, the political atmosphere of the times. And I don't know that Sildavia comes in, or is mentioned in any of these other stories. We're here in Land of Black Gold. We're introduced to another one of his fictional countries, Hamed, the Middle Eastern country. But this is the first time that Sildavia pops up again, and we'll see it again after these 2 volumes. So a comparison of the 2 telegrams shows, of course, the English translation. Everything is all of this is redone in English, but it also shows that there's been some alterations here, and especially with the crown on the telegram. I'm guessing to make it look more like a British telegram. So again, reinforcing this idea that we are in England in a place called Marlinshire, which is where Marlinspike Hall is, and not the Chateau de Moulinsart in Belgium. So off they go. And while they're on their plane, they're discussing what has happened to Calculus, and we see down here, we see our villain, someone who's listening to their conversation, and their interest is piqued at the mention of our friend Calculus. And also here we have, we're introduced to the idea that Sildavia is a big exporter of mineral water, which Captain Haddock takes great offense to. And as they're going through customs, the Sildavian customs official opens up Captain Haddock's luggage and finds many bottles of whiskey. And he says, "There's a heavy import duty, sir. Only mineral water here in Sildavia." And they met in the airport by their someone who has come there to meet him, a chauffeur, who takes them away, and we see the villain, our alleged villain, our suspected villain on the plane is talking to someone. Take a good look at these 2. They're joining the Mammoth. You see Zippo have picked them up already, so we're wondering, what is this Mammoth and Zippo? Sounds a lot like code language. And off they go into the Sildavian countryside. It looks a lot like what we saw in King Ottokar's scepter. The houses and the villager there. Doesn't look like a lot has changed. They notice that there's a car following them. The driver doesn't give them much information other than to say that they're going to join their friend Calculus. They go through many checkpoints. Haddock trying to explain to them that he's thirsty, and so what do they bring out to him? Some mineral water. As the poor guard is trying to open the bottle, he says, "You think I'll drink a single drop of that nauseating liquid?" It reminds me of his dealings with the llamas in Prisoners of the Sun. Not only are they being followed, but there's a helicopter now on their tail. More checkpoints, checkpoint after checkpoint. Finally, they get to where they're going. The garage doors of the structure open, and they find themselves driving down into an underground tunnel. The car that's been following them is behind them. Finally, they stop, and of course Haddock has to have some sort of mishap there. They're greeted by a person named Frank Wolf, who introduces himself as Calculus's assistant engineer. And we find out that the men that have been following them, who are now, we see they're heavily armed, are Zippo men. They're a special security detail that have been assigned to this project that Calculus is involved with. So Wolf takes them to Calculus. A nice page ending panel here. They open the door, come in, and see Calculus about ready to be struck with a mallet. And we see that he's wearing a plexiglass, what they call a multiplex helmet. He greets them, and Tintin's asking, "Oh, what is this helmet all about? What's going on?" And we find out that Calculus is now using an ear trumpet. Tintin says, "Oh, you're using an ear trumpet now, but why not a hearing aid, one of those little instruments fitting into the ear?" And Calculus says, "Oh, yes, I know what you mean, but they're meant for deaf people, and I'm only a little hard of hearing in one ear." See, Captain Haddock says, now look, Mr. Hard of Hearing, when are we going to get an answer? We see our villains conferring. We'll be going back and forth between our stars, our heroes, and these two plotters. And the head guy's assistant is telling him that the Mammoth project is going ahead, but they reveal that they have an agent planted among Calculus's team, an agent they call Agent K-27 in the Ministry. So are they in the Bordurian Ministry? What government is behind this? We're wondering. And this agent has photographed some information on microfilm, and the information seems to please the boss. Finally, Calculus reveals to the captain what's going on. He tells them that uranium deposits have been found in the mountains here, and that they're building an atomic research center on the location of near where the deposits are. And then he tells Captain Haddock and Tintin the real goal of this research center is to build a rocket to go to the moon. And this sends Captain Haddock into spasms of laughter. He thinks the whole thing is a fool's errand, and he raises his glass to him. "Here's to you, passengers for the moon, all aboard the bus. Sorry, the rocket. You are taking passengers, I hope," Calculus said. "Of course. Why else do you think I'd ask you to join me?" The reaction that this brings out of Captain is so extreme. What are you saying? Me on the moon with you? Your brain's gotten radioactive. And of course, as he's saying all this, little detail that we don't catch maybe until later, as we're saying all this, Calculus, who has laid down his ear trumpet, picks up Haddock's pipe instead. So of course he can't hear all of these threats Haddock is making, and his response is, "Oh, thank you, Captain, thank you. I knew I could count on you." So we're introduced to Mr. Baxter, who is the one of the main officials at the plant. Calculus introduces him as the Director General of the center. So now it's nighttime, and the security guards are making their rounds, and they see a thick brown smoke coming out of one of the corridors, which then brings the fire crew on the scene. Wolf wakes up Calculus. Everybody is told to leave their room, and in the confusion, Tintin realizes that Calculus has grabbed Captain Haddock's pipe instead of his ear trumpet. And he says, "Oh, I thought I wasn't hearing very well." The fire crew spray some foam into the source of the smoke, and out comes Captain Haddock, covered in the foam. Turns out that during the night he tried to light his pipe, and he realized that he had Calculus's ear trumpet instead, and the material ebonite that it was made out of started producing the smoke. And now we have our first big panel scene. There's a few of these in this volume, and we see the atomic pile, which is powering the research center. And one of the criticisms of this volume is that it's kind of pedantic. There's a lot of explanatory text about how all this technology is working. And while it might be to some people's taste, some people who are really into the science behind the stories might find all this fascinating, and I certainly did. I wanted to know how all these things were supposed to work. It kind of slows down the story. So the story, while the artwork is really magnificent at this point, the story gets kind of drags because of it. It's not as lively as the last two big two-parters. Hergé decided to do this story in response to his former collaborator Edgar P. Jacobs. They had ended their partnership, but Edgar P. Jacobs was still an artist working for Tintin magazine along with Hergé, and he was doing a series of his own. He had created his series Blake and Mortimer, and he had done a big story arc called the Secret of the Swordfish, which was the series in general had a big sci-fi element to it. Sci-fi in the sense of technology, not space opera, but more the hard sci-fi kind of stuff. And so Hergé was inspired to do this Moon story arc as a result of his friendly rivalry with Edgar P. Jacobs. And like Jacobs, he didn't want to add any fantastic elements into it. So he didn't want them to encounter aliens when they got to the moon or anything like that. He wanted to make things as realistic as possible. And there were a few experts that he consulted with on the technical details to make sure that what he was, writing in his story could be plausible from a scientific perspective. And here we see another big panel with some larger than usual figures. Hergé usually, he keeps the figures in his panels. They're sort of this mid-size, like this. You don't often see close-ups or larger drawn figures. And here we see this is the test rocket. Hergé used the German V-2 rockets from World War II as kind of a model for the look of his space rocket. And this red and white checkerboard design was very distinctive. This is a really nice idea to do it this way visually. It really draws your attention in. Some more slapstick humor involving calculus and Haddock ending up getting sprayed with the paint. And here we have the first big crisis. So during the night, some unidentified aircraft is flying over the center, which brings out the security, and somebody is parachuted from the aircraft and has landed somewhere in the center. And during all this, an unexploded shell comes down. Tintin can hear it coming down in his bed, and it happens to land right in Calculus's room. And Calculus, being more or less deaf, doesn't hear any of it and sleeps through the whole thing, including when the shell explodes, and sends his bed out through the wall with him on it, completely mangled. He looks completely fine, and ends up being stuck on some telephone wires. The next day, the center has a briefing to explain that some enemy agents have infiltrated the research area, and they've parachuted down, and they're out there somewhere. And in comes Thompson and Thompson now, so making one of their classic appearances. And this time they're coming, this is probably the most ridiculous outfit they've worn so far. They're coming in the Greek national costume, thinking that it's the Sildavian one. Their attempt to blend in with the natives. Hergé asks for a few days to go and hike in the mountains around the research area, but of course his idea is to spend the time trying to find out what has happened to the person who's parachuted down. He's got a map of the area, and he's using it to find a ventilator shaft, where he's suspecting something might be going on there. He encounters a little clan of bear cubs that have been attracted by the honey sandwiches that he's packed in his bag. And just as he suspected, during the night, there's a handoff of information. Somebody inside the shaft, a mole apparently working in the plant, is handing some information off to the enemy agent. So we found out that there's more than one, as Tintin tells him, hands up, a shot rings out. So there's another person watching. As we see, Tintin is in contact with Captain Haddock back in the center. So whatever Haddock was in on his plan to try to find this out. And before he got shot, he was talking to Haddock, and we see one of the Thompsons coming in behind him with a very suspicious look on his face. And as the lights go out in the center, there's a tussle in the dark, and the Thompsons have nabbed somebody. They've ended up nabbing Frank Wolf when the lights come back on, and they find that Haddock has been knocked out. So we find out what had happened is that Captain Haddock, as we saw, was in contact with Tintin. Tintin had told him where the ventilator shaft was. So during the night, Haddock decided to station himself there to see if he could catch whoever was going to go to the ventilator shaft. As the lights went off, he was struck on the head, and we hear that Wolf, who's speaking kind of suspiciously and haltingly, is our first, we have our first suspicions about Wolf, that he might be involved in things here in the way he's talking. And he claims that Captain Haddock was acting odd, and he saw him leave his quarters, and so he decided to follow him. And then the lights went off, And there was a shot outside, and then someone jostled him in the dark, and then he found himself in the hands of the Thompsons. And as Mr. Baxter attempts to interview the Thompsons, they begin having a reaction that's that we see is similar from the last volume, Land of Black Gold. They're still having some after effects from the pills that they took. Baxter gets a call, tells him that they found Tintin, that he's okay, he's unconscious, he's in the sick bay. So Baxter and Wolf and Haddock go off, leaving the Thompsons again to continue their investigation. They've been assigned as a special undercover security detail for the research center. They're always being sent on these very important missions, despite the fact that they're totally incompetent. So they find the shaft, nothing suspicious there. They begin looking around. Some nice panels of big machinery. I wonder what all this stuff is for. And so they come to a door and a screen. One of them says, "You stay here, I'm going to see what's behind that door." And as he does, he walks around behind the screen, and the other Thompson screams. He comes out white as a ghost. "What's the matter? You're white as a sheet. Here, tell me, and stop your teeth chattering." He says, a skeleton. I saw a skeleton there behind the screen." So they both go to look. Of course, there's nothing there. So the other one goes back around again, and as this one drops his stick, the other screams again. He saw it again. There's a skeleton right there behind that screen. And of course we see that they're standing behind some sort of x-ray screen. And sometime later they're caught. They've apprehended the culprit. The osteologist is standing there, tapping his foot with his hands on his hips. And we see from our villain here in his cellar hideout or bunker, listening to his radio, that the first mission has been completed. He says, "Okay, we'll have their rocket now." Some more physical humor, some more slapstick involving Captain Haddock. And now they're about ready to launch their test rocket, and Tintin, who we find out that the bullet only grazed his skull, is back on his feet again with a bandaged head. Some other great views of the rocket control panel here. I think I've used this before when I needed some machinery in the background. And they succeed in launching the rocket, and Tintin is given the privilege of throwing the switch, which launches the rocket. So more gags involving Haddock's pipe. Calculus, and his enthusiasm, knocks it out of his mouth. He spends the next 2 pages while everything else is going on trying to look for his pipe. He ends up underneath Calculus's control panel. Still looking for it, doesn't know where it is. Snowy tries to tell him where it is. It's flipped up and has been hooked in the back of his belt of his coveralls. And he finally realizes it when it starts burning his rear end. Tintin allows Captain Haddock the privilege of throwing the next switch. And he does so with great gusto. Tintin says, "Careful, not so hard." But at this point they realize that the rocket is going off course and they can't figure out what is happening. They do realize that eventually that the rocket has been taken control of by somebody else. It's now out of their control, and whoever has infiltrated the base has stolen some information which gives their adversaries, has given their adversaries the power to take over control of the rocket remotely. And so Cuthbert decides that, well, now's the time to destroy the rocket, lest it get in the hands of their enemies. And so they do, but not before Cuthbert begins pulling out his hair. His first attempt doesn't work. He begins pulling out his hair and manages to grab Captain Haddock's beard in the process, before Tintin realizes that the wires have been disconnected. And so the test rocket is destroyed. However, other than that, it's been a success, so they move on with their plan to work on the real rocket that will take them to the moon. And here we have a nice full panel diagram, sort of like a blueprint, even printed in the blue, we get of the rocket, and a list of all the various sections of the rocket and the compartments and so forth. And we also get to see our first look at the distinctive orange spacesuits, which are such a major element on the cover of the following volume, Explorers on the Moon. And, you know, all the design of the rocket, the design of the space suits, all the machinery, it's got such a great classic 1950s sci-fi look to it. It's really very charming, the whole look of this volume. Captain Haddock here is testing the suit. They're putting him through his motions, but he begins doing all sorts of strange movements. They're wondering what's going on. They take off his helmet, and a bunch of mice begin scurrying out. Wolf says, "Oh, they were the mice we used for the first tests. We forgot to take them out of the suit." And as Captain Haddock walks through a portal and bumps his head once more, at this point, Captain Haddock is at his breaking point. He's been suffering through so much what he sees the foolishness of the Thompsons, Calculus's harebrained idea of going to the moon. He's had enough, and he lets Calculus know. He says, "I've had enough of being a playmate of your neurotic mice. I've had enough, do you understand? Do you want to go to the moon? We'll go, but without me. I'm going home to Marlinspike, and you can go on acting the goat for as long as you like." And for some reason, this is the thing that has that makes Calculus snap. For the first time, he completely loses it. He says, "Oh, I'm acting the goat. I'm acting the goat, am I? This is too much. I'm acting the goat. I demand an apology. An apology, you hear? You have no right to say such a thing. Acting the goat. To dare to say such a thing to me. You follow me. I'll show you just how I act the goat. Come along." Captain Haddock is completely speechless. He's never seen Calculus stand up to him like this before. So he leads him out. And here we have this is the beginning of a long sequence of Calculus dressing down Haddock for the way he's been speaking to him. And every time Haddock has some other pratfall or something else happens to him, Calculus has no patience for it. "So you're trying to give me the slip? Well, you aren't going to. Come on, hurry." So I act the goat. He leads them down the hallway, and as the guard tries to stop them, tells them they're not wearing the regulation clothing, Calculus chases him off with his, "Begone, you worm, out of my sight. I'm acting the goat, do you hear?" He says, "I suppose all these people are acting the goat, eh?" I believe that might be Edgar P. Jacobs there. Hergé often liked to draw him and his friends into the background sometimes. Faces down another guard and actually picks him up and puts him on a coat hook. Calculus leads Haddock out to the garage, commandeers a jeep, all the while putting the security into a big tizzy. And as he breaks to a stop, Haddock flies forward onto the jeep and he says, well, what do you think of that? Look what the goat created. And then we have our big reveal, and there it is. I can't imagine how long it took them to draw all of this, having to do this in perspective. This would seem like a nightmare to me to have to draw all of this, all of these all the structure of these gantries. But we're not done, so Calculus is still on his tirade, and Haddock is impressed by what he's seeing now for the first time. Calculus brings him along. He says, aren't you ashamed of yourself making a scene in front of everybody? Stand up. The lift is waiting. So up they go into the elevator and into the rocket. He says, well, what do you think of it? You can't call this acting the goat, eh? And Haddock is quite impressed, amazing, astonishing. Calculus is still won't let him off the hook. Take care, look out behind you. He has no patience for Haddock's foolishness. I believe you do it on purpose, don't you? Every time there's a chance to bump yourself or sprawl on the floor, you take it. Can't you pay attention? Haddock is finally getting the dressing down that he's had coming to him for the past, 6 volumes that he's known Calculus. So we use, this is a great sequence. I love this sequence that begins with Calculus snapping. He uses this, Hergé uses this to give us a grand tour of the rocket. From the way up in the elevator and the gantries down into the rocket, we're getting to see all of the interior. So Calculus is, in effect, giving us the tour and explaining what everything does, how the airlocks work. It's a great little, this is just one of the 4 tiers, one of the panels on the 4 tiers, and we get so much in there. Hergé, in fact, he had a model of this rocket created with all the insides worked out in detail that he could pull apart section by section. And he gave this to the artists in the studio to help them draw the background so that they would always get the background just right, no matter what angle was being shown. So the sequence comes to an end when Calculus, not looking where he's going, falls through a hatch, lands on the level below. And as they come down to see if he's all right, we find out that Calculus has now lost his memory. He doesn't know where he is. He has like amnesia. He says, who are you? And what's that fancy dress? So now we're in trouble. And one of the security guards that Calculus has made angry comes down to yell at Calculus. And Calculus responds with, I don't understand. What do you want? Where am I? So the news is brought back to Baxter that now Calculus has amnesia. They bring in the doctors. They can't give Baxter a definitive answer on how or when Calculus will recover. Baxter's freaking out now, but he must be cured. He alone knows the secrets of the nuclear motor. Without him, the Moon Project is impossible. So now they all set about trying to bring Calculus back to his senses again. And here we have Haddock cavorting around in a clown-like way to try to get a reaction out of Calculus, who is now just sitting there kind of comatose. Even shooting him with a water pistol has very little effect on him. Haddock goes through one trick after another. He attempts to set off a firecracker under his chair, but only succeeds in blowing up himself. He comes in with a sheet and chains, trying to scare him as if he's a ghost. Finally, he gets so exasperated of trying to restore Calculus's memory that he begins yelling at him again. He says, he just sits there looking at me, the jellyfish. You couldn't be frightened, could you? You moth-eaten marmot. I suppose you think I'm enjoying myself acting the goat. And then here, this is what brings back Calculus's memory. And now we're back where we left off. A goat? Me? A goat? A goat? You dare call me a goat? This is too much. You're not getting away with it. I demand an apology. Help, help, he's cured. And afterwards, Calculus greets Captain Haddock with a hug in gratitude for restoring his memory. So the mission is back on. So now we find that we're in 1 week's time. On the night of the 2nd and 3rd at 1:34 a.m., the launching will take place. Everything is now in place and ready for the launch. And now here we get a glimpse of someone who is addressed merely as Colonel. And we see that those of us who have read King Ottokar's Scepter might recognize this character as Colonel Jorgen, who is the main villain of that volume. And here we see he is behind the plot to sabotage the rocket. And he says, don't forget that I have an old score to settle with our young friend Tintin. So Hergé likes to bring back many of his previous characters and give them repeat performances. And as we're nearing the end of this volume, we suspect that Colonel Jorgen will have some sort of role in the next volume. Meanwhile, Wolf is going to supervise the loading up of the rocket. Captain Haddock asks if he can join him. He has a crate and a package that he wishes to bring along. Wolf asks him, well, what's in the crate behind you? He says, oh, it's just 2 or 3 bottles of whiskey. He says, you know, it might be freezing up there, so I'm just taking precautions. And he says, I'm sorry, Captain, but there's no alcoholic liquors allowed on board. We have a little rum for emergencies. And what's in this parcel? Well, it's a little tobacco for my pipe. And he says, oh, no smoking on board. The oxygen supplies are more than sufficient, but we can't waste them. Captain Haddock does not like this. And he walks away claiming that he's not going now. As he passes by the Thompsons, they say, yeah, you're very wise to not go on such a wild goose chase. It's a ridiculous idea. Besides, at your age, it would be sheer madness. And this gets to the Captain Haddock. I suppose you take me for a rusty old tub ready for the scrap heap. You'll see how old I am. I'm going, do you hear? And I'll send you a postcard from the moon. Another great bit of slapstick is I'm really impressed at how Hergé has to think up, you know, one gag after another and having to top himself each time. And here they're opening up the bottle of champagne. It's the eve of the launch, and as they're opening up the champagne, the cork pops right into Captain Haddock's mouth, lodges in his throat. And off they go. And a nice nighttime panel of the rocket being lit by floodlights. And up the gantries they go into the rocket. The hatch slams shut. A nice sort of panel there with some finality on it. We wonder, will they be okay? And the sentiment is reflected with Baxter saying, the die is cast. There they are inside what could well become their tomb. Last few pages of this volume, we see the launch sequence. And Hergé really uses this drawn-out sequence to build up the tension. You can see everybody's sweating beads of sweat. Everybody has their own thoughts of self-doubt. What am I doing in this outfit? Well, Tintin, old man, you've lived through plenty of adventures, but I wonder if this isn't going to be your last. And we see Wolf and his own thoughts. What have I done? What have I done? How could I have let myself get entangled in this dreadful business? So our suspicions are kind of confirmed here that Wolf is somehow involved in the villain's plot. Even calculus. Will this rocket take off as planned as I press this button, or will everything blow up? 20 seconds. What is that dull, steady thumping noise? Oh, it's just the sound of my own heart beating. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And calculus says, into the hands of fate, as he presses the button. And off we go. Great panel. We see the curve of the earth, a little bit of Europe with Italy and here launching out from the region of the Balkans. Everybody's watching and listening, even the villain. He says, by Lucifer, surely nothing can have gone wrong. They're trying to, people down at the base are trying to keep in contact with them on radio, but they're not responding up in the rocket. It says, Earth calling rocket, are you receiving me? Earth calling. Baxter comes in and says, well, we've been calling them without interruption for some time now. I can't understand it. Keep on trying. Earth calling moon rocket, are you receiving me? Earth calling. The rocket continues up. And the volume ends with the people manning the radio, still trying to contact Calculus and Tintin and crew with no response. And off they go into space. What dangers await Tintin and his friends on the moon? What will happen on this perilous journey into space? Will they ever return to Earth? You can join in the rest of their great adventures when you read Explorers on the Moon. And that we shall read in our next episode. Thank you for joining me.